A classified memo has Washington on the edge of its seat, and the state of our union is strong, according to President Trump. So why are his calls for unity so divisive? I'm Molly Roberts, and it's only Thursday. With me are opinion writers Steve Stromberg, Christine Emba, and Chuck Lane. And hopefully you, online. Send us your comments, and we'll try to get them on the show. That's a clip from President Trump's first State of the Union address. Our video of all the times he clapped for himself was 3 minutes long, but we trimmed it for this show. We'll get to the speech in a moment, but first, let's dive into the Nunes memo. It's called that after Congressman Devin Nunes, Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Republicans in the committee voted to hashtag release the memo, despite Democrats' objections. Here's what Trump said when asked at the State of the Union if he'd support the memo's release.
Yeah, you got his attention. Great speaking. Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine that?
Yes, sir.
Last year, he'd be too angry.
How you doing?
How's it going? How's it chances? Good? Yeah. Good. Get it done.
The FBI says it has grave concerns about the memo, and Democrats call it a distraction from the Russia investigation. So, what's in this memo, and what's at stake? Want to lay it out for us, Steve?
I can try. The answer is, first of all, we don't really know what's in the memo because it obviously hasn't been released yet, though that might come as soon as today. It was written by Devin Nunes' staff, and apparently, according to reports, including emanations from the FBI and other sources, it's heavily cherry-picked information about a warrant that was obtained on Carter Page, who was one of Donald Trump's campaign associates. And the apparent allegation is that the warrant was improperly obtained by the FBI. At least that's the impression that the memo gives. Now, the Democrats have not been allowed to roll out their own response. Their own memo, their response to the memo about the memo.
Right.
So it's unclear whether we're ever going to see that side of the story, but the Justice Department and the FBI have both been pretty strong in public in their concerns about releasing the cherry-picked information. On top of that, CNN is also reporting today, or yesterday maybe, but they're reporting anyway, that that Donald Trump has been telling associates that the memo is in fact, releasing the memo is in fact a way to discredit the Russia investigation. So the motive behind the release seems pretty clear.
Right, so let's talk more about that. Why does Trump want this released so badly? What is it going to say about the Mueller investigation or the FBI investigation that's going to look so great for him? And why are Republicans into helping him out on this one?
Well, supposedly the nub of the matter is that this famous Steele dossier, which had all these kind of salacious claims about Trump's behavior and how the Russians were going to blackmail him, was in some way, shape, or form, and by the way, which was also funded in part by the Democrats during the campaign, was somehow used as the basis for obtaining this warrant on Carter Page. And that's what the Republicans consider to be the great outrage here, again, according to all the reports. So, of course, Trump's motivation in bringing that out would be to show that during 2016, the FBI was in some way working against him and therefore can't be trusted to assist Mueller in this investigation now, and furthermore, proves in hindsight how justified he was in firing Jim Comey, and on and on and on. And so he is eager for the disclosure, and there's even some reports suggesting that he and Devin Nunes, or his staff and Devin Nunes, worked together in preparing the memo. The issue, I think, is a little bit complicated because I don't see how we as journalists can be against the disclosure of information. I just think we have to be aware that this is not exactly some sort of fair-minded, objective evaluation of all the facts before the committee. This is a highly partisan filtering of what they have. And of course, the Democrats are insisting look, that warrant was based on a range of information,
Right.
not just what they may have had in the dossier.
Right. I think that as journalists, we are supposed to be in favor of the release of information, but it actually doesn't seem that clear that there's that much information contained in this document anyway. I think it's interesting. We saw this first statement where Trump said, you know, he's going to release it 100%, which how many times have we heard Trump say that before, right?
Yes.
But there's been so much distraction and sound and fury signifying nothing about this memo that, honestly, at least half of the purpose, to me, seems to be just a distractionary mechanism. We're talking about the memo, we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about passing things back and forth within the House, whether apparently there were edits made to the memo before it was given to the president, but without telling the House Republicans. Again, so there's a discussion there. Anything but talking about the actual investigation against the president and like actual questions that have been levied against him. This memo is just a new conversation that keeps us from talking about anything else.
Or any other public policy issue, right? Other
yeah.
than the Russia investigation.
Well,
It's totally taken all the oxygen out of the room, so to speak.
And also to your point, I think it's not just a distraction, but in fact has already left the impression that the FBI has acted in a corrupt sort of way, at least with sort of certainly the folks behind the hashtag release the memo.
Yeah.
Russian bots, apparently.
Right. Well, and the Russian bots, but also more generally. I mean, if you can muddy the waters such that all of a sudden, you know, institutions that we once viewed as credible are no longer maybe assumed to be credible, even if the memo is never released, in a way, the objective is already accomplished.
We have a comment from Deborah Platt on Facebook. She says, more obstruction and distraction from the White House and Nunes. We are watching every move they make to try and stop Mueller from revealing the truth about Russian involvement in our presidential election. So, same sort of thing, a distraction, them trying to get that out of the way. The downside for Democrats, besides the distraction that you were kind of touching on, Steve, is what does this mean in terms of damaging our norms, investigative norms, just how we view the FBI. So I'm curious what you guys think about that. I mean, is the memo as damaging as Democrats are suggesting it would be because of the distrust it would sow in the FBI?
Well, I think there are a couple of questions embedded into there. One, and I think the one that probably concerns the intelligence community, the law enforcement community quite a bit, is the question of the treatment of classified information.
Right.
And so I think there's that, and then there's also there's the politicization of law enforcement, which is sort of a separate box of concern under the, which I think that there's probably concern about both. I think the big question from here is not just what impression though it leaves, and not just sort of how the classified information was treated and vetted, but also what Trump decides to do with it. So there's. Will he fire Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein? Will he fire Chris Wray, the FBI director? Will he fire Mueller? All of these people have, in one way or another, attracted the president's ire, either recently or for quite a long time. So that's a big concern.
I'm going to take the. I think one problem in this whole discussion is that because Trump is behaving so outrageously, he's forcing anybody who disagrees with him to kind of idealize the FBI. And let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the idea that maybe the FBI is, imperfect and perhaps one or two of its officials acted out of a corrupt motive in something somewhere is not, to me, a shocking notion. So I just want to put that out there, that an unfortunate consequence of this is it's sort of setting up the FBI as some kind of pillar of our democracy when it's actually like the secret police, I mean, not literally, but it's as close as we have in this society. I think the big picture here is that for many years the FBI, notwithstanding the many abuses it committed over the years, enjoyed wide support among both Republicans and Democrats because they had a sense of consensus about all the other objectives of government that the FBI was sort of serving, who our enemies were abroad, who our criminal threats were domestically. All that now is broken down. All that underlying consensus is broken down. And these agencies, the FBI, the Secret Service, and the CIA are being drawn into the political partisan battle. And it is extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. Trump is essentially trying to kind of gain control over them, to gain some kind of loyalty over them, as part of this broader project of sort of breaking up whatever the old Washington swamp or the deep state was, whatever you want to call it. But we can't pretend that the previous consensus was in good shape before he started doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a good and different point. And Alfred Date on YouTube has a comment too, kind of going against, I think, the tenor of some of our discussions here, which says, everything in that memo should be true, 100% truth. MSM, mainstream media, will make this story look like a joke, but it is not. And so also, Chuck, you were talking about kind of doubts about the FBI and ways that there might be issues embedded in the FBI, and I think that brings us to our next topic here. This week also, FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe stepped down amid an internal probe into his handling of the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton. McCabe is a symbol for President Trump of what he sees as the Bureau's political bias. Does Trump have a point?
Well, I don't know, actually, if you can say that about Andrew McCabe. But I do think he has a point about Peter Strzok.
Yep.
And the woman that he was communicating with, Lisa Page. I mean, it's totally irresponsible for somebody in Peter Strzok's position to be, it's not to have those thoughts, but to put them in writing and to be bandying about, you know, partisan political comments when he's in a counter-espionage position at the FBI.
But I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
I think all the younger
Yeah,
people
I know.
communicating via text and, you know, not only talking out loud or
Yeah.
simultaneously chiming in here, but you guys take the floor.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit spurious. I wonder, would it have been better for him to have had those thoughts and to have acted on them or not acted on them and just like not told anybody about them and kept them secret? I suppose for the purposes of, I don't know, the impression that he gives off. But then again, he wasn't actually giving off any impression until this was revealed.
I guess
that's
I'm
a statement, but
he's in charge of counter-espionage at the FBI, and he is putting these things in writing. I mean, that's just incompetent. I mean, the idea that you would send messages back and forth to somebody you're having an extramarital affair with in writing, and you're the chief of counter-espionage at the FBI, it just blows my mind. So, and furthermore, that you're tasked with doing an objective investigation on these highly political cases. I'm just talking about it as just a matter of sheer prudence that you would put, yes, you should not put those thoughts down on writing. You can have them. You can say them over the phone, but to put them in writing, just crazy.
so
That's
maybe
what's throwing me.
so maybe that just means that he's bad at counter-espionage, and that seems like a larger and separate problem. But the fact that this has been turned into a conversation about whether he is attacking Trump, whether the whole industry and association is against the Republican Party, whether they're somehow destroying or pulling down the presidency, like that seems to be a different leap, and that I think sows distrust and fear in a very different way. Like there's a difference between somebody who's like not as good at their job as they should be, which is a problem. The FBI and all these agencies can be flawed. And the idea that they are somehow plotting against the government and its citizenry. And that is, I think, a larger allegation that is scarier and more damaging to America and its institutions.
Yeah,
I agree with you, but wouldn't we all feel better if these text messages didn't exist? Because they are giving the evidence, they are giving the, you know, substance to these wild charges. That's my problem.
Never text, kids.
My biggest complaint with what you said, Chuck, was using the word partisan, because it's also come out that, in fact, this FBI official was, in fact, fairly critical of Hillary Clinton, too. And so it wasn't as though he was just sort of spewing a party line, I hate Trump and nobody else sort of thing on these text messages. We've also gotten word reports, leaks, that reported over the last couple of days that Strzok was the one who was behind the Clinton letter, the infamous Clinton letter to Congress, which arguably ditched, took the election from her.
But he's
So,
also the one who softened, Comey's first press conference.
right. So it's hard to identify a partisan pattern, is what I'm saying with his behavior.
Fair enough. I would just say I'll substitute political for partisan. right?
Yeah.
You know, this kind of overt political expression. I mean, if a journalist had done it, right, you'd question the objectivity of that journalist. And I think that's the nub of the matter here. This guy is supposed to be, you know, very objective and in both appearance and reality. And, you know, in some ways the appearance is more important than the reality.
I just think it's a difficult question then for anyone in the civil service. I mean, where are we drawing the lines? Who are the people who shouldn't be allowed to put their political views in text or email or anywhere that they're going to see them? And who are the people for whom that's fine? Because these people do have lives and they do have views and they have office hours and personal hours. And I just think it's a difficult standard to kind of hammer out.
Yeah, I guess I would draw the line at somebody who's involved, you know, making political comments about the political futures of people they're actively investigating.
Yeah.
I think that's over the line. But I agree with you, it's not an easy one.
I've got to say there's one thing that really bothers me about this whole constellation of issues, which is that the president seems to be determined to destroy the notion that you can of professionalism in law enforcement, that you can have personal views that are somehow cordoned off from your professional from your day job, from what you're and in fact that you can be motivated by a public spiritedness over whatever partisan or, you know, other sort of bands of loyalty to other things that you might have. So everything then becomes, are you loyal to me or are you loyal to some other tribe? And that's very dangerous.
That's what worries me so much about the deep state allegations from the Trump camp, the idea that these people are bad because they've been there forever and have been doing their jobs forever during multiple administrations. I mean, that should be something you'd think that we'd value. So we have a comment from Michael on Facebook who says, as a baby boomer, it amazes me that we've gone from unquestioning support of the FBI and condemnation of Russia in the 60s to the exact opposite. It's all about politics and what will help your side.
I've seen a couple of, as a baby boomer, seen some comments about that. There is this irony now that the Democrats and the more liberal Democrats especially are taking up the cudgels for the FBI and Russia, whereas I guess you would say that the left historically has taken a different position. And with good reason. I mean, the FBI, they spied on Martin Luther King. They did black bag jobs on left-wing groups in this country. I mean, you just can't pretend all that didn't happen. And, you know, it's not a perfect institution. And I think, I agree with everything you're saying, is that Trump is sort of in a sloppy and self-interested and, you know, bad faith way questioning the good faith of these people. But I don't think we should go to the other extreme and say that none dare question their good faith. That's all.
No, I think unquestioning support of the FBI, unquestioning condemnation of Russia, I mean, I think the answer is probably just to question everything over every period of history.
Except for the Washington Post, don't question it.
Yes, right, don't question journalism. So allegations of Russian election meddling, obstruction of justice, and potential FBI misdeeds were all swirling when President Trump delivered his first State of the Union address to Congress on Tuesday. He called for unity, but sent lots of divisive messages, including about immigration. He proposed both a reduction in immigration and a path to citizenship for young undocumented immigrants called Dreamers. So, what do we think about the Dreamers? President Trump also said, a line of much note, although apparently he's said it before, Americans are dreamers too. I'd like to start with that. I think that line really, really got to some people in both good ways and bad. Some people thought this was super inspiring. Some people thought this was an absolutely horrible thing to say. So how did the line work out? How did it play? What's wrong with it? I know you have thoughts, Christine.
That line did get to me, actually, because it was really cleverly done, honestly. Americans are dreamers too. We're all in here together. It was sort of a veneer of unity, but underneath it was the clear implication that if Americans are dreamers, and dreamers are maybe something not quite American. We're not sure what they are. We're not sure if they're included. And it was interesting to note also that that was the line that resonated the most with figures from the extreme right. David Duke retweeted that, you know, thanking the president. Richard Spencer was like, oh, finally a president we can believe in. It was a clear message that some people are in and some people are out. And despite the message of unity that was supposed to be happening throughout this speech, it was full of those moments implying that America is X and everything outside of Donald Trump's circle or view was not American. And that included a lot of Americans.
Right. So I guess let's talk about what he was actually proposing for immigration, even amid messages of unity, and what he just proposed again at the Republican retreat in West Virginia, and what he wants to see, I think, Congress get into law. Does what Trump has proposed for his immigration framework, is it going to be positive? Should the Dreamers feel reassured? Is it going to be a fix to the immigration system, or?
Well, we can always dream, but I'm skeptical of two things. The one thing I'm sort of skeptical about is that they're ever going to pass a bill. The one thing I'm really skeptical about is that this was a good faith attempt at getting there, because I view it in the context of the Republican political victory in the shutdown. What they learned from that was, if you show a little rationality about immigration, you can sort of box the Democrats into a position that disadvantages them politically. So they just did more of that in the State of the Union, and in this offer, such as it was has sort of this one generous component. 1.8 million Dreamers get citizenship, and then like 5 components that they know the Democrats can't accept, but which also themselves kind of poll pretty well, like getting rid of the diversity lottery. So what I see this as is just an attempt to sort of consolidate a winning Republican message in November, and to get the Republicans into a political situation where they have the upper hand. And frankly, in that respect, even though I agree with Christine that it was sort of a noxious formulation, I think it's likely to be politically successful, because I think for the Democrats to be in a position where their message for the rest of this year is just Dreamers, 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 and kind of no focus on anything else, there aren't enough Dreamers and people who support the Dreamers to make that super effective in the fall.
Yeah, I mean the whole speech, and this part included, I thought was it's like a slap in the face with a velvet glove, in the sense that it was, it was all about all this really high-minded rhetoric, unity. This is what America's about. We talked about freedom and freedom fighters at the end, and then when you look, for example, on this immigration, as you've pointed out, on this immigration proposal, which he called middle of the road, or down the middle, whatever he said, which is basically, almost a Stephen Miller fantasy. It's the actual meat of the speech did not live up to any of the rhetoric that he was using. You'd have to, to believe that this president is about unity and uniting Americans behind common purpose and progress and whatever else. You'd have to ignore his entire first year, as if it's sort of ignore what we just went through. This is what I'm really about, was basically what this, what that speech sounded like. And then he gives zero indication that moving forward he's going to be any different, certainly in terms of policy.
Except he didn't even ignore what his first year had looked like. I mean, you had all these introductions of like brave Americans and good Americans doing good things, which is nice, but he uses them to introduce ridiculous notions and reminders of how divisive he is. Yeah. So we have young Preston, I guess, who was planting flags on veterans' graves, which is a beautiful thing. But he was only a set piece so that the president could remind us all that he hates NFL players who kneel during the anthem.
That's right. That's right.
He brought up a grieving family who had lost their daughter so that he could hammer home MS-13 notes and say that immigrants were killers, basically. Yes. Like, this is Trump all over the place. But for some reason, he just decided to start with the word unity, and we're all saying, oh, well, like, maybe he was kind of you. No, that was not real.
The thing about it is, this is expert demagoguery. This isn't like sloppy, amateurish demagoguery. This was extremely skillfully done. And I repeat, I think as we sit here today, I think the political tide has kind of started to flow back in his direction. His approval rating, though still well below 50%, is now back up over 40. The polls on who you prefer, Democrat or Republican, in the midterm election have started to narrow in favor of the Republicans. And the fact of the matter is the economy, is doing quite well and is probably still going to be doing well in November. And look, this is politics. This is an ugly business, and he and the people around him are playing according to some pretty raw rules. And I think it behooves us to recognize when they're actually kind of getting their way. And a month ago, I think their prospects looked a lot worse than they do today. And there's a lot of time to go. But when you consider that that's their prime directive, right, which is keeping the majorities in both houses in November, I think they're doing well at it from their point of view.
So was there anything in Trump's speech to give him credit for? I mean, Republicans were pleased. This was teleprompter Trump, not Twitter Trump. But in terms of the policy that he was putting in there, is there anything that looked good, looked promising, from infrastructure spending to his child care plan? And does any of this look like something, first of all, that would be nice to see happen? Second of all, that possibly could happen with this Congress?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned infrastructure. That would be one of the more specific things. He proposed $1.5 trillion for infrastructure spending. It's sort of unclear, though, what exactly that means. Is it $1.5 trillion in federal dollars? Is that $1.5 trillion sort of generated from private money and state money that might not appear? And so there's a tricky question around that. A lot of his other proposals are really not particularly fleshed out. I mean, in fact, it was striking this State of the Union, which is, State of the Union addresses are usually pretty policy heavy and a little, they might not go through a lot of details, but they'll have more than what was in this one. There was very little actual policy in the speech.
Which is crazy because it was the longest, I think, since Bill Clinton's in 2000,
Right.
but he spent all the time saying the nice things about the human props.
And clapping for himself. Hasn't it been Infrastructure Week for like the past 53 weeks anyways? Like that was the interesting thing and like kind of alarming to me thing about this speech is what you were saying, Chuck. Like there aren't really any policies. Like he's not great at necessarily cooperating with other politicians. But he is somehow really good at saying the things that a certain group of people want to hear and making them sound vaguely convincing in the moment. So whether it's a down-the-middle compromise on immigration, which was a line that everyone was like, oh, yeah, no, that... And suddenly, like, 3 days later wakes up and says, wait, that's not a compromise at all. Well, or we're going to work on infrastructure. Like, oh, that sounds really... There is no infrastructure plan. Like, what is this infrastructure plan that we've been talking about? Appealing to the masses and, saying things that sound good, talking about the tax bonuses that they're going to get, but there's nothing behind it, but it still works.
If there's an infrastructure bill this year, I will eat the internet. This is like Lucy and the football. They've been talking about this forever. And one of the things people overlook is that there's a guy in Washington who's not for a big infrastructure bill. His name is Mitch McConnell. Yeah. And he has said this many times. He thinks it's a waste of money, we don't need it, blah, blah, blah. The president has been boasting about the gleaming roads and highways and hospitals and whatnot that he's going to build and so on ever since the inauguration, and he's done basically nothing about it. I think this is just another. The other line in the speech that reminded me of that was prison reform. Remember, he said we need prison reform. He said that again today. And prison reform is, strangely enough, a pretty popular cause in this country right now.
Bipartisan right
and
now.
Bipartisan. But it's just a buzzword at this point. There's nothing substantive to that. And by the way, 85% of prisoners are not under the federal government's control anyway, so it's a limited prospect. But again, as Christine pointed out, it's packaged well.
And we have a fun fact, I think possibly from a viewer. Mitch McConnell is married to Trump's Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao. So infrastructure, Mitch McConnell, I guess.
That and that's not all that earth-shattering a fact. And I think actually she's in charge of all the highway programs and stuff, which probably has given Mitch McConnell even more of an insight into sort of, from his point of view, how wasteful they can be and how long they take to be put in. That's the other thing Trump was talking about. We're going to cut down the time it takes to get a permit to 2 years, and he's always saying this, like, or maybe even 1, Right. And people have been talking about that for forever. It's a hearty perennial, gets applause. I will eat the internet if it happens this year. I may have to eat the internet.
Yeah, we'll have to upgrade our technology to hold you to it, but I guess we'll do our best. So State of the Union night wasn't only about Trump and the Republicans, it was also about the Democrats. Congressman Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts gave the Democratic response to Trump's State of the Union address, or one of many Democratic responses, and here is a little bit of what he said.
Russia, knee-deep in our democracy. An all-out war on environmental protection, a Justice Department rolling back civil rights by the day, hatred and supremacy proudly marching in our streets. This is not who we are.
So, he got a little flack for some chapstick in the corner of his lip, but besides that, how'd he do? Is this good for the Democrats? Is this the direction they should be heading?
It's the same direction they've been heading, let's put it that way. Of course, this is only one of 5 speeches the party felt compelled to provide. I thought it was, from my point of view, I didn't know very much about him before. I thought, despite a little problem with the microphone there where you kind of couldn't hear him at times, I thought he delivered the speech quite well. And, you know, the content was familiar from, you know, any number of things we've heard from other people before. But I have to say that it lacked an economic message to counter the fact that they're going to go to the polls in November amid prosperity. The Democrats need a response to this tax bill. And Jason Furman, a former advisor to President Obama, had a very good one in an op-ed the other day. He said that the Democrats should campaign on repeal and replace the tax bill with a whole list of specifics about, you know, how to make it actually benefit people as opposed to just the wealthy. And strangely, the Democrats have not been able to unify around an economic message, and I didn't hear one.
Do they have a? I mean, it's hard. Other than, I mean, mostly the speech was anti-Trump, although he didn't really mention Trump. It's hard to pin down exactly what the Democrats' specific agenda is. You know, remember in 2006 when they retook the House and the Senate, they had the sort of 6 for 06, which you could quibble with all sorts of things, and we did at the time. In the 6 for 06, but it was a recognizable, you know, student loan. We're going to cut the interest rate and, you know, do this, right? So it's still sort of, you know, Chuck Schumer saying, well, we have this what, better deal program,
better deal, or,
you know.
You know, what, I have to say what I like about, sorry to interrupt, but what I liked about the idea of repeal and replace the tax bill was it struck me as a potentially effective mirror image to the repeal and replace Obamacare. It's sort of, you just attach a piece of legislation that the people aren't that crazy about to this party, and you campaign on it over and over and over again. Now, of course, it has the problem that once you win, you got to do what you said, and the Republicans couldn't do that with Obamacare. It would be tough, but I think it would give some kind of coherence to what is otherwise a pretty, you know, kind of all over the lot message that they're putting out, other than just, you know, Trump is bad.
Well, first of all, I do want to point out that the phrase knee-deep in democracy is one that hadn't struck me when I was listening to the speech in person, but it's weird and I love it. But I'm interested in this repeal and replace idea because I think one of the things that came through and one of the things that they wanted to come through in this speech was a sort of, not necessarily just anti-Trump message, but sort of anti this sort of painful and noxious atmosphere of division and separatism, right? This pitting of us against them. And I think the tax bill in some ways has been sort of an example of that. Like it's pitting the rich against the poor, or those who benefit from the tax bill and those who think they're benefiting but maybe will get like a one-time check from their employer and then never hear anything again. I think that the question of division and this sort of like us versus them attackism that's happened and has been a huge feature of this administration is what worries people the most. It's not necessarily like a specific policy or like one man in this like one area of government who's doing this one thing, because most people don't live in Washington, D.C. and are maybe not tracking it that closely. But just this atmosphere of anger, I think, is what really worries people. And if the Democrats can prove that they have something else, some way to tie us together, some way to actually bring unity, or at least try and slow the madness, I think that could be compelling for people in this sort of resistance era.
The trick there, though, Christine, is that those are things that can be cured through different behavior by leadership as opposed to a piece of legislation specifically. So, you know, Trump has been toxic because of the way he behaves, the way he addresses people, the way he insults people, the way he aggressively tweets at, you know, all these enemies that he's constantly creating. But how you combat that with sort of like a bill in Congress is difficult. So there's kind of like a mismatch between this event, which is an election for Congress, and the problem it's supposed to meet. That's why I sort of liked the addressing themselves to the tax bill, because it offers an opportunity to say, you know what, the policy that he's putting in place is not worth tolerating all this bad behavior, because there's a certain small number of people out there who are kind of like, well, you know, okay, I hate the tweets and everything, but he's made the economy better, or he's, he's given me a $1,000 bonus. And the only way to get at that is to show people, you know what, this trade you're making isn't worth it.
Well, good luck to them, and good luck to all of us. We're out of time, but not opinions. So keep in touch on Facebook and Twitter. And turn to WashingtonPost.com/opinions for more takes on the Nunes memo, Mueller investigation, and beyond. Take care.